Democrats, something that will be necessary for it to pass in a closely divided Senate. The sweeping policy package initially came with a $3.5 trillion price tag, and Biden struggled to get some Democrats on board. So let's look at the basics of Biden's proposal, formerly called the Build Back Better plan. It would provide up to 35 million families with monthly child tax credits of up to $300 until 2023. And it would also make it easier to buy health insurance under the Obamacare health law, which Biden played a crucial part in passing as vice president. Climate measures would include tax credits for people buying electric cars and other programs to encourage the manufacturing of solar panels and wind turbines and clean energy production. Well, the plan is expected to cost about $1.75 trillion within 10 years. That's half of what Biden originally wanted, but it would still be the largest set of social programs passed in the U.S. in generations. Covering the story for us is Alan Fisher. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. So let's talk a little bit more about what Biden is getting, Alan, and what he's not getting.
Well, it's a busy day on Capitol Hill. Joe Biden has been up there speaking to congressional Republicans. He's now back here in the White House, obviously packing before his trip to Rome. When asked if he was happy, he says it's a good day. So he obviously thinks that the deal there can be done. He's confident enough that he's going to make some remarks from the East Room in the White House, probably in the next half hour or so before he heads off to Rome. He believes that he's got a good deal. It's going to expand Medicaid, as you've said. It's going to improve schooling for children. It's going to improve elder care across the United States as well. And he believes that with the tax credits they'll get under the climate change part of the bill, that will boost manufacturing here in the United States. What isn't he getting? Well, there's no action on prescription charges. They simply didn't have the votes to push that through. There's no free tuition in community colleges. That was something that Bernie Sanders was very keen on. That's simply not going to happen as well. And there'll be no paid family leave. The United States drags well behind its G7 partners on that issue. Joe Biden initially wanted to introduce 12 weeks paid family leave. That went down during negotiations over the last few months to 4. It's now at 0. But Joe Biden believes this is a deal that will get support across the Democratic Party. And he needs that because it's likely that Republicans will vote against it en masse. So he needs every single vote he has in both houses to push this through.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Alan. I mean, how confident is he that he can actually get this passed?
Well, he's saying that he thinks there's a framework there and he believes that Democrats will support it. That's not quite a definitive statement of, well, hey, we have a done deal, thank you very much, let's move on. He's aware that there could still be some holdouts, people who are not upset that they're not getting the $3.5 trillion bill, not getting some of the things that Joe Biden promised during the election campaign last year. Some of the things that some Democrats will say Joe Biden was elected to deliver. But what Joe Biden will tell them is, this is a win. You've got to walk away from this. You weren't going to get everything, and we've got to put some wins on the board before Congress starts getting bogged down in heading towards the midterm elections. Yes, they might be a year away, but people are already thinking about that. Plus, it will also help in 2 important gubernatorial elections, which are due to take place on Tuesday in Virginia and New Jersey. He thinks that there is enough there that both sides of the Democratic Party will come together and support this, and that will be enough to push it to a bill onto his desk that he will happily sign. And he obviously wants the political win on climate change before he goes to Glasgow, so he can say to world leaders, look, we don't just talk a good game, I'm delivering with this bill that's going through Congress. Therefore, the rest of the world needs to step up and match the United States. Those would be big wins for Joe Biden. The Republicans are still waiting on their official reaction. We should get that probably in the next couple of hours, but we'll hear from Joe Biden within the next hour, and he's expected to take a small lap of honour in the East Room.
Yeah, Alan, and we'll bring that live to our viewers and certainly cross back to you when Joe Biden speaks. Thank you so much for the time being. Alan Fisher reporting from the White House. Well, staying with the United States, and top bosses from some of the world's most powerful oil and gas companies are answering questions at the U.S. Senate for their firms' roles in climate change. Shell, ExxonMobil, BP and Chevron are accused of funding campaigns that downplay their effects on the environment for decades. The session comes days before the COP climate gathering over in Glasgow. Heidi Jo Castro joining us from Washington, D.C. to first talk to us about the hearing's significance, Heidi.
During this could be a historic appearance. It is the first time that these top oil chiefs are testifying under oath before Congress, and their feet will be held to the fire. The Democrats who called for this hearing before the House Oversight Committee, they've already collected documents. They say that's evidence showing these companies knew as early as the 1970s that the continual burning of fossil fuels was leading to dramatic consequences for the environment, and that rather than make that knowledge public, they buried it and embarked on a coordinated campaign to oppose climate science and climate action. Now, the Democrats who called for this hearing are hoping it has some impact similar to the 1990s big tobacco hearings, which were very consequential, that eventually led to some $200 billion in settlements that big tobacco played out. And the hearing is continuing right now.
All right. And Heidi, how is Big Oil defending itself?
Right. So these CEOs and presidents, they have all categorically denied deliberately misleading the public on climate change, and they are highlighting recent efforts to move more toward clean energy, particularly BP's commitment to net zero by 2050. But the big question is whether these commitments are real action or just PR, and there may be some evidence to the latter, because in June, a lobbyist for ExxonMobil was caught on camera secretly recorded saying that ExxonMobil's support for a carbon tax was a ploy because the company believed that such a policy would never become reality. Meanwhile, this is happening as recent polling shows that Americans are growing increasingly alarmed by climate change, that nearly 6 in 10 Americans now believe climate change is happening at an accelerated pace, and the majority do want policies to confront it.
Okay, Heidi, thank you so much for that reporting from Capitol Hill. Now, the UK says threats by France to block British boats from its ports are a breach of international law. It's the latest escalation in a dispute linked to a post-Brexit fishing agreement. The comments come after France seized a British fishing boat in its waters without a license. Paris is threatening sanctions if the UK doesn't grant more licenses to French fishermen in UK waters. The British government says any sanctions would be met with the appropriate retaliation.
It is very disappointing to see the comments that came from France yesterday. We believe these are disappointing and disproportionate and not what we would expect from a close ally and partner. The measures being threatened do not appear to be compatible with the Trade and Cooperation Agreement or wider international law, and if carried through, will be met with an appropriate and calibrated response.
It's time for us to get respect. I stand by the fact we issued threats and pursued dialogue until now, since it allowed our fishermen to have a bit over half of the fishing licenses. We have to also see the glass half full, but that's not enough and not acceptable at all. So now we need to speak the language of strength, since that seems to be the only thing this British government understands.
Let's bring in Andrew Simmons. He's joining us from London. So Brexit was back in January. Andrew, why the escalation now?
Because fishing has been a major aspect of division, particularly between France and Britain for many years. And put simply, the French want more access to British waters. They feel the UK is being unfair. Now, in that robust address to the government, to the Parliament, should I say, you heard there the Environment Minister saying that 1,700 EU vessels are allowed to fish in the 6 to 10 mile zone outside the British coast, and out of that there are 736 French trawlers. Now, the French say the proportion that Britain is claiming that 98% of French applications are accepted is completely and utterly wrong. And they're citing the case of Jersey, which is a crown dependency of the UK, that's in the Channel Islands, as being the worst offender for actually allowing vessels to fish in its waters only a few kilometres off the coast of France. Now, what France is saying is going to happen is this, that next Tuesday they will ban all British trawlers from landing any catches at French ports, and beyond that they will also stop all freight and give really strident customs checks, not just seafood, but a variety of other goods as well. And this is likely to cause a lot of disruption. Furthermore, there are other measures. A second round of sanctions, as they're being described, is quite possible if the UK doesn't show any willingness to accept more licenses. And that could include, that certainly French ministers are refusing to rule it out at this stage, a restriction of electricity supplies to the UK. Now, Jersey is 95% dependent on French power for domestic use. So we're talking here about a serious escalation. It was back in May that we saw a lot of action, protest action in Jersey by French trawlers off the coast and around its main port. That involved Britain and France deploying their navies to actually observe events. Now, that all blew down eventually with some concessions on either sides. This is much more serious, and relations between France and the UK haven't been as low as this for many years.
Okay, thank you so much. Andrew Simmons reporting from London. But first, the UN Security Council has issued its first statement expressing serious concern about the military takeover in Sudan. Coup leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has dismissed at least 6 ambassadors after they spoke out against Monday's takeover. There is increasing opposition both at home and abroad. The US and UN have called for the immediate release of civilian leaders. Heba Morgan has more from Khartoum.
People are still calling for civil disobedience and general strikes to stay away from work, both at state and federal levels. But there have been political moves to try to mediate between the two sides. That is to say, between the civilian component of the deposed transitional government and the military that took over on Monday. Now, we've heard statements from the EU as well as from Norway that they went to the residence of Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok and met with him and made sure that he was in good health. The United Nations mission in Sudan, UNITAM, Secretary General, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General, put out a statement saying that the two sides should return to the Constitutional Declaration. That's the power sharing agreement that was signed between the Forces of Freedom and Change Coalition and the military on August 2019. So there are efforts to try to bring back the two sides, the military and the Forces of Freedom and Change Coalition, to return to that Constitutional Declaration. Let's not forget that when General Burhan made the announcement on Monday, he said that he was committed to that power sharing agreement with the exception of a few articles. But those are crucial articles that state the formation of the Sovereignty Council, which is shared between the military and the civilians, the Executive Cabinet, which was headed by Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, and the roles and the authorities of those councils, as well as cancelling, as well as bringing back the Transitional Military Council. So all of that, there are political efforts and diplomatic efforts to try to bring those two sides back again to the negotiating table. But the United Nations also called for the release of the other political prisoners, including the members of the Sovereignty Council and Executive Cabinet who were arrested on Monday.
Well, the United Nations Security Council has just issued its first statement on Sudan since that military takeover. For more on this, Kristen Salumi is joining us from the United Nations. So what's in the statement, Kristen?
Well, Doreen, it's a fairly short statement. I have a copy of it right here, 1 page long, and it expresses serious concern about the military takeover and the suspension of some transitional government institutions. It also expresses concern about the detention of Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok and other government officials. The release also does call for the release of those who've been detained, noting that the Prime Minister has been returned to his home. And it calls for respect for human rights, in particular the rights of protesters to be out on the street. It's important to note that the United Nations integrated transition mission in Sudan has been working there to support the transition to elections and democratic institutions, and the statement also reaffirms those efforts. So the Council is basically saying it's very concerned about the situation there and calling for respect for these transitional institutions.
Does the Council, Kristen, or at least certain members of the UN Security Council, believe that this statement will make a difference?
Well, this is a press statement, which is probably the weakest form of council action. It doesn't have the same weight as a resolution per se. A Security Council resolution has the weight of international law. If the council wanted to sanction the military or start a peacekeeping mission, for example, it would have to pass a resolution. But it does show that the council is unified in its concern about the situation. It didn't go as far as some council members wanted. It didn't condemn the military takeover. It just expresses concern. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been complaining lately that a lack of unity in the council is behind events like this, that it leads to countries thinking they can get away with things like this. They say that there's a deterrent effect when the council speaks with one voice. So you can't underestimate the power of the council coming together and speaking out and expressing its concern about the situation, even though the wording perhaps isn't as strong as some would have liked.
Okay, thank you so much. Kristen Salumi reporting from the United Nations. Well, rebels in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region say the military has carried out another airstrike. The Ethiopian government says it targeted a site in Mekelle used by Tigrayan forces to make and repair weapons. But a Tigray People's Liberation Front spokesman denied that, saying the attack struck a civilian residence. Fighting's been going on for nearly a year, but airstrikes by government troops have increased in the past week and a half. Samuel Getachew is a journalist in Addis Ababa. He says there are conflicting reports on the number of casualties.
According to the Ethiopian government, they're saying that the target was an engineering firm that they accuse of siding with TPLF and also providing weapons. But from the images we were watching from a distance, mostly from the side of the TPLF, they're saying they targeted near a school, near a residential area, and according to Reuters, from 3 to up to 12 people have been killed so far.
Argentina's former president, Mauricio Macri, has arrived in the court in the town of Dolores to face espionage charges. Macri is accused of ordering the country's intelligence agency to intimidate and spy on the families of crew members who died on board a submarine which was lost at sea in 2017. On the story is Daniel Schweinler for us. He's joining us from Dolores to talk to us a little bit more about what this case is about. Daniel.
Yeah, hi. Well, Mauricio Macri, the former president, is in this courthouse behind me. We believe he's just declared. He appeared before a small group of supporters a couple of blocks away from here in the town of Dolores to say that obviously he's innocent, that he doesn't know anything about any spying charges. He didn't spy on the families of the victims of the submarine, the San Juan, or anybody else for that matter. It sounded more like an election rally. There are congressional elections in a couple of weeks' time here in Argentina. Many of his supporters would like to see him stand for the presidency again. So it smacked more of an electoral rally than of him coming here to declare his innocence. But that is the case. We believe the families of those victims of the submarine sinking are also here in town. We haven't seen them yet, but they're here. These were the victims of the spying charges. They were campaigning at the time when the submarine disappeared in November 2017 to find out what had happened to their loved ones. They wanted the authorities to tell them more. And instead, it seems, or the accusation is, that the authorities, under the orders of Mauricio Macri, the then president, ordered them to be spied on to find out what it was they were organizing. So that basically is the case, but it has split the country in many ways. Those who were against Mauricio Macri when he was president, and the current government of Alberto Fernandez, who were obviously happy to win the elections a couple of years ago, and they would like to see this case come to the courts.
Daniel, you say that it's split the country, but what kind of support does Macri have?
He still has a fair amount of support. Only two, maybe 300 supporters turned out here in Dolores, but we're a long way from everywhere, about 200 kilometers south of the capital of Buenos Aires. But yes, there's no obvious candidate for the presidency in the presidential elections in a couple of years' time. So many people would like to see him throw his hat into the ring. I mean, he lost elections in 2019. They believe he can come back. It's been a difficult time for the current government with the pandemic, with severe economic problems, so they would like to see him come back. He does have some support, certainly within his own party. He certainly has subtly stated his intentions, without stating it outright, that he would like to run again. So yeah, there is certainly support. This in some ways is the beginnings of testing the water to see just how much support he may have a couple of years before the elections are due. So yes, we'll see what happens here and in the weeks beyond.
Okay, thank you so much. Daniel Schweinler reporting from Dolores, Argentina. In Haiti, providing health care is difficult, even in the best of times, but these are times of crisis. And gangs have blockaded ports, creating a fuel shortage. It's a critical situation for patients in hospital, as Rob Reynolds reports in the capital, Port-au-Prince.
Of all the places that are suffering in Haiti today, this may be one of the deepest wells of misery. Port-au-Prince's General Hospital, where patients receive bare-bones treatment for chronic diseases, COVID infections, and traumatic injuries. This man says he was attacked by bandits with machetes.
They tried to kill me, and I don't even know who it was.
Compounding conditions in Haitian healthcare, a severe fuel shortage is crippling many hospitals. The public electrical grid is unreliable, so hospitals are powered by generators. Without fuel for the generators, hospitals can't operate kidney dialysis machines, ventilators, incubators for premature babies, and other equipment.
When the hospital cannot provide properly because of the fuel problem, that affects other things. So, they can't provide the right services for the kids, pregnant women, and COVID patients.
Many hospitals are now near the end of their supplies.
Some 40 hospitals have sent a message to UNICEF saying that they may have to close immediately. Is this true? What's the situation there?
Will hospitals close? There are a lot of hospitals that will close because they can't find fuel, so they can't function. The majority of them are public and private.
The fuel crisis is largely due to gangs that have hijacked tanker trucks and blockaded the port where fuel depots are located.
Dozens of hospitals have warned that they may have to shut their doors in the coming days as a result of the fuel shortage, and that would leave thousands of people in need of medical care with no place to go.
Mylène Bien-Aimé has come to the hospital bringing food and clothing for her 20-year-old nephew, who is suffering from severe diabetes.
You have to buy everything for them. My nephew is a diabetic, so he needs medication, but everything is shut down.
UN agencies and Haitian authorities are trying to create a sort of humanitarian corridor to get fuel to hospitals. But unless there's a breakthrough, the consequences may be dire.
If the situation continues, the day will come. This weekend coming up with hundreds of complications and deaths.
In a country full of suffering with a government that has virtually ceased to function, the prospects for these patients and many other Haitians is bleak. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Port-au-Prince.
And an effort by Haiti's justice minister to assure the public it's safe to go to petrol stations didn't go as planned. Liz Quittel was heading for a photo op when his vehicle was shot at. He's seen here speaking just after the incident, and it's not yet clear who fired the shots.